Hello and welcome to Backyard Catch. This is Nick Roby. Thank you for joining us once again. Hope you had a great Thanksgiving. Hope you enjoyed lots of fun with family and friends. Excited to talk about some college football and man, rivalry weekend. Just when we think we know exactly what's going to happen, man, it always just keeps us on our toes, right? So, man, it what a fun game and a lot to talk about. Texas A&M makes a hire. But first, we got to talk about the big game, right? The game. Uh, Ohio State goes into Michigan as number two in the country, traveling to the number 2 and 3 team in the country playing each other. And Michigan comes on top 30-24. The Wolverines get it done. I mean, I was interested to see, Harbaugh. This is his final game of his second 3-game suspension for the sign stealing allegations brought down by the Big Ten. So he's still been with the team all week. He just couldn't coach on the sidelines. But it didn't seem to affect them that much. If anything, it seemed like kind of galvanized them. And this game's a very like back and forth type of a game. It always feels like both teams can be in it and you're punching, counter punching, like definitely kind of a boxing kind of a feel to it. Michigan seemed ready to go, and Ohio State, I don't think they played like a bad game. I mean, I think McCord had a couple turnovers, and Michigan, they came out early. Ohio State comes back into it, and then Michigan, it's only a 1 touchdown game going into the fourth quarter. I just think that Michigan, they just didn't make mistakes, and I kept waiting for them to see if they would do, and I had picked Ohio State to cover, and I thought they would win because I liked the way that they were playing a little bit better. I wasn't sure how Michigan would be able to handle all this going forward, and I wasn't quite sure what we would get out of JJ McCarthy, and I thought he played well. He did everything they asked him to, and so I mean, and Michigan ran the ball better than Ohio State. Ohio State just made a couple more mistakes, and so now Michigan's going to the Big Ten title against Iowa, which they're a 23-point favorite. I mean, you could argue this was the playing game for the playoff. And now Ohio State for a third straight year is licking their wounds, unfortunately, and they've lost now 3 in a row. And so that's an interesting question, especially as we go into offseason and into summer conversations. But that's really interesting to me. But Michigan, man, they're a machine. They're one of the best programs in the country. And now the next thing for them is they need to do something and win when they're in the playoff. But they look like very much right there with Georgia. If both of them win, they're in for sure. So, but props to Michigan, man. They got it done. They ran the ball. They played good enough defense, and Ohio State comes up short. So that one was a big one. The other one too we want to hit on is it's Alabama Auburn. Man, it was hard to know what we were going to get in this one because Auburn, lost 31-10 at home against New Mexico State, and Alabama, you can kind of see what they were going to walk into, and you just didn't know with Auburn. But Auburn, man, they just kept it close. They didn't throw it that much. They didn't need to. They ran for over 200 yards, and they had the game won, and it was 4th and 31, and one of the craziest plays where Alabama needs to score, where the game is over. There's 30 seconds left or so, but they need to score. Millwall throws a crazy play up to Bond, and he hits in the back of the end zone, and they win the ball game. I mean, it's crazy. And Auburn, man, it's really tough for them because you don't want to lose to your rival. But I mean, the fight they showed was just really impressive. And that Hugh Freeze is going to continue to get better. This is only year 1 for them. And so I was just impressed in how they played. And they've pushed Georgia and Alabama. They've ran for over 200 yards on an offense that does not throw the ball that well. Against the 2 best teams in the SEC are going to play each other. Like they've ran the ball at home and kept it really close. So it's impressive. So I'll be curious to see what they do in the future with Auburn, but when they get more of their guys, Hugh Freeze gets his guys more into that program. But Alabama, they escape, man. I mean, that's the name of the game. They escape and they keep their playoff hopes alive, and they need to win out for sure. But now they sit up was going to be a massive game in Atlanta between them and Georgia once again. And a lot of eyes will be on that ball game for sure this weekend. But Alabama, man, they escaped in just another classic Iron Bowl. I mean, those games, even when you think you know what's going to happen, you don't. And it's just, that one was a crazy ball game. Other games just from around the country we want to hit on. Friday night, I mean, Mississippi State beat Mississippi on Thanksgiving. We talked about that. On Friday night, Oregon just takes care of business against Oregon State. It was not close. They ended up winning 31-7. But Bo Nix and those guys, they're one of the best looking teams in the country. I mean, they are one of the best looking teams in the country. I don't care like what the record is. That team is good. And they set up a rematch with Washington, and they're the favorite by almost 10 points. And I think deservedly so. I think it's 9.5, and I think that feels about right, honestly. They're one of the best teams in the country, and it'll be very interesting to see if they win, what happens, you know? And there's only 4 spots to go, and we could have 3 undefeated teams, and a one-loss team is trying to fight for that last spot in this last round of the 4-team playoff. But Oregon, man, looks like one of the best teams in the country. When you just go on like looks and feels of one of the best teams in the country, they're playing like it, you know? I mean, you could argue that they had the best like look and feel of a team from this past weekend. If you just go and like look and feel of how they played in the rivalry game and of those top teams, you could argue they felt like the best. Not saying they are the best per se, but just the look and feel of it. Georgia got pushed too by Georgia Tech more than I thought they would. I mean, Georgia Tech definitely covered that number. I was a little surprised by that. They kind of struggled with that a little bit, but Georgia gets out there with a win. And that's the big thing with these rivalry games, especially with a team that you're supposed to be, or you're a bigger favorite in. You just got to win and move on, you know. But Georgia, you know, give credit to Georgia Tech. They fought really hard, but Georgia comes out with that. And so we got Pac-12. Title game is set between Oregon and Washington. That's a rematch in Vegas. You've got Georgia and Alabama. Louisville loses a shocker to Kentucky. I was really surprised by that, especially at home. I don't know, that just might be a team that's just not used to being in that position necessarily, but at home too. But it didn't matter. It doesn't matter for like conference title race, but it does for, you know, bragging rights and just for your season. But so they're still 10-2. They'll face a Florida State team that, of course, lost Jordan Travis for the rest of the year, and it was looking close in Florida, but they escape and cover on the road, and they're undefeated. They'll be playing the ACC title game, and here's the thing. I've been hearing about this a little bit, and it just, to me, I just want to set the record straight. Just for me, like personally, I don't think the fact that there's some people who are questioning whether or not like Florida State like feels like a playoff team or whatnot, but like when we talk about like deserving, that's one thing. If you like how a team looks, or like, man, I don't know if they can like if they would beat, you know, so and so like a Georgia or, you know, Oregon or whomever, Michigan. But the fact that if they're an undefeated team, if they're a Power 5 team, guys, a Power 5 undefeated team deserves to be in the college football playoff. Like they just do. It's just, and if we have 5 undefeateds, we will cross that bridge. But that we're not going to ever cross that bridge because it's never happened. And it's not going to happen because next year's a 12-team playoff. But guys, if there's an undefeated Power 5 team who wins their conference title, they deserve to be in that playoff. Now, if you want to rank them wherever you want to rank them, that's a different conversation. But when it comes to like, they deserve to be in there, and I don't care. We're talking about like, that's the conversation of like whether or not like how they would do in the future, or they lost Jordan Travis, or they haven't looked good since he went out. Well, yeah, they lost their star quarterback. Of course, they're going to look a little bit different. But talking about deserving, yes, they deserve to go. They beat LSU, who has a good chance of their quarterback being the Heisman winner. Like he's in that conversation. They beat a Clemson team at home, who's only has a couple of losses in like 8 years at home, who now is in the top 20, you know, top 25, and just beat South Carolina, and they finished 8-4. But that's still a good win, you know, like they're undefeated, and they'll beat a Louisville team who's a top 15 team. Like, what are we talking about? They beat Florida on the road. Did Tennessee beat Florida on the road? No. Like, what are we talking about? Like it's even when you start comparing, and you want to break them down. Michigan, who did Michigan play other than Penn State, Ohio State? Like Georgia, like they played. Like yes, they beat some teams later in the season, but it, like what are we talking about? Like FSU deserves to be there. So that's just my little rant. The fact that we're just starting to question that, it's just like whether or not how you feel about all these competitions. Like if they're in a Power Five league, those teams deserve to be there. If they're undefeated, now if they lose, it's different. Like of course, like that's a different conversation though. So yeah, Texas is playing Oklahoma State. Both those teams move and advance into the conference title games. That will be very interesting. And then of course Michigan and Iowa. So there you have it. That is just a little bit of a rant that I had, and so I honestly kind of lost my train of thought. Or Oklahoma State, they escaped against BYU because they had to win to even advance to the conference title game. So congrats to them. They'll be tough against Texas for sure. And other games of note, let's see, other ones we didn't hit. Clemson did beat South Carolina. So that one was a defensive battle and just a big rivalry game. But so defensively, Clemson played really well. They had the fumble recovery and then the interception later, and so then it was just a defensive battle. So they win. They finished the season 8-4, and now South Carolina is trying to make a bowl as well. LSU beat Texas A&M 42-30, and Jaden Daniels is arguably in that, like I talked about earlier, they're in that Heisman race. I think it's between him, Bo Nix, and Michael Penix. And to me, I think Daniels is probably the front runner right now. But to me, my vote would be for Bo Nix. I just think he's been the best player in the country. And I just like how it goes, and especially if they win against Washington and he gets his team to the playoff. Or right in that conversation, I think it goes to Bo Nix, but I can definitely see Jaden Daniels. I think he's been electric this year. I think between one of those two guys, I think that makes sense to me. I personally don't love having Heisman winners with teams with like 3 or more losses. Like I don't love that, but I get like how much they like. A lot of times they mean so much to those teams because maybe defensively they're not as strong, or they're needing to do all these things to help their team win, and they're electric. But I don't love that. I know at win and losses you can't put that all on the quarterback, but I don't personally love that. But I totally get getting Jaden Daniels that. But I think if Bo Nix wins and he looks good against Washington on Friday night, in Vegas, then I think Bo Nix is the front runner. So, but we got to talk about Texas A&M. This was very interesting over the weekend. They lose, against LSU, but they had fired Jimbo Fisher, and they've been in talks of like who they might talk to, of who would be their next coach. And it looked for a while it could be Mark Stoops, from Kentucky. He's been there for forever, and I like him. I think he's a good coach. It would have been interesting to see him cross to the western part of the SEC and see how he does at a bigger program that definitely is like football first. Because Kentucky's more traditionally a basketball school, but he's done a really good job there, and you have all the resources in the world. But I thought what was really interesting is when it seemed like Stoops was going to get the job, then there was a lot of like pushback from the fans, and so interesting. I don't know if it was just like you've seen him before in the SEC, and he just wasn't a splashing of fame. I don't know. That was really interesting to me, and I like Stoops. I'd be interested to see how he does there. But to me, this is one of the guys I was kind of interested in. I think one of the first calls I would have made was to Dan Lanning, but I think Mike Elko would have been up there for sure, and he gets the job. He's announced as the head coach. And if we remember that he was the defensive coordinator from 18 to 21 before he took the Duke job. So he's actually was the defensive coordinator, and now he's going to be the head guy. And I thought he did an excellent job at Duke. I mean, he made them into a tough out, and if Leonard doesn't get hurt, I think they win a few more ball games. I mean, Riley Leonard meant so much to that team, but defensively he's such a good strategist, and he's done a great job too as a CEO over there. So very interesting to see with him stepping into the SEC and stepping into just the money and the expectations and different things like that. But he has been in A&M. He gets the culture there. And I really do think that he'll have a good handle. I personally, I personally like Elko more than Stoops, but I would have been okay with Stoops personally. But uh, you get Elko, and so I'm very interested to see what that looks like and how he goes about that job. So that's really it. I just wanted just to hit on that. We'll have a lot more, searches going on. Offensive coordinator Oklahoma. He leaves Brent Venables and he goes to Mississippi State. So there's a lot of moving, changing parts that are going on. But so there you have it. That is rivalry weekend. A lot of fun games over the weekend. And now we've got conference championship, which we'll talk about later in the week. We've got ACC, SEC basketball coming up. So excited to talk about that too later in the week. So hope you are doing well and then you enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks for listening. I'm signing off.